Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. The countdown is on until polls open, and on a special hour-long close-up, we are breaking down all the biggest developments in the Granite State debates. Joining us to provide insight this morning are the two Steves. We have former Mayor of Portsmouth, Steve Marchand, and the former two-time nominee for Congress on the Republican side in CD2, Steve Negron. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Much appreciated. We have a wealth of Steves with us today. So let's start with the big takeaway in that Granite State debate for governor. Steve Negron, what did you think about that debate?
Well, I think it wasn't any surprise to anybody. You know that they were going to ratchet up the distinctions between the two. I think what we saw is that you're trying to keep the heat down a little bit, but it's inevitable when you're trying to make that decision to get to the corner office in Concord. I thought Kelly Ayotte did a great job of trying to differentiate herself from Mayor Craig. And then Mayor Craig is trying to bring back Kelly, you know, with some of the stuff that she said back in 2016 about, you know, her opinions about, at that time, President nominee Donald Trump. So I think what to do is there's a distinct difference in approach to that. I think what you see is that Mayor Craig, I think, had a bigger hill to climb because we've got optics in the city of Manchester. When you drive around and you see things, a little different with Kelly. You know, she's coming off of a kind of like a hiatus from public office. So I think it was a good debate. I think a lot of ideas were brought out, and it's going to be up to the public to decide what's going to happen, which way they want to go.
Steve Marchand, big takeaways from that debate.
Well, look, as a practical matter, Kelly Ayotte is the incumbent in this race. She was better known at the beginning of the general election. She's better funded, though they both have plenty of money. And Joyce had to do two things over the course of this campaign. One, she had to make Kelly fireable as the pseudo-incumbent, and then she had to make herself hireable, right? It's sort of related, but not the same job. I think that through the campaign has done a good job of saying Kelly could be fired. She should be defeated in that sense. And with the abortion debate, I think she continued hitting that point effectively. But the most effective part for Joyce was probably as Steve just said, the connecting to the Donald Trump. If his character was insufficient for endorsement in 2016, then what has happened in the last 8 years that would suddenly make him more endorsable given all of the legal challenges and so forth? And that's a really tough one for Kelly to answer. And let's be honest, she didn't answer it. She avoided answering that question. And Joyce is right there, maybe a few points behind. I thought that was the most important moment of the debate, and for Joyce, a critical moment, because that may be the way to get those couple extra points she'll probably need to come from a little behind and win that race.
We'll dig into that a little bit more later in this segment, but on the abortion issue, Steve Negron, this is one that's, you know, puts Republicans on defense in CD2 for certain, but statewide, this has been a big issue. How do you think Kelly Ayotte handled the barrage of attacks and answering those in this debate?
Well, it's certainly a very difficult position to be in as a conservative, right? Because after the Dobbs decision and was pushed back down to the states, we thought in 22 that there was going to be this huge wave because of the Dobbs decision, which pushed down, and we saw actually the antithesis of that. It was something that the Democrats ran on it very successfully. What I've heard Kelly say is that, you know, we currently have the laws in New Hampshire signed by Governor Sununu, and that she has said openly that if anything comes up to make those more stringent, that she would not sign those bills. You can say those kind of things, but I think there's a lot of folks out there that are saying they're just waiting for something, for a crack, to have an opportunity to change those. Look, you know, it was President Clinton who said, you know, that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Right? And I think that is now a situation, and the Democrats, quite frankly, are keeping it in the forefront because I think it's a winning argument for them right now.
Steve, what about on the Democratic side? You know, they get really upset when people say, hey, you're for abortion up until the moment of birth. And then we ask these candidates about should there be any protections for a viable fetus, and they never answer the question. They won't say. Why don't they have a better answer on this?
Well, here is the answer. Because it's not the individual, it's not the government's business. At the end of the day, it's a very complicated issue. We all know stories about people we know and love that are involved in complicated situations. The last thing you want is the government involved in it. So it's sort of, the question, respectfully, is framed wrong. It's not about when can the government say there is a limit, when can the government say this is complicated, but not so complicated that I can't have a say. It's more along the lines of, it's none of your business, government. And frankly, that's a very New Hampshire answer, whether we're talking about the way we historically have dealt with gun rights and needing to wear a safety belt when you're driving. I mean, that's the ethos of live free or die. And ironically, that would, I think, be a pretty comfortable answer to just say, it's not the government's business, stay out of it, period, end of sentence.
All right, one of the biggest issues for Democrats is abortion. One of the biggest issues for Republicans is taxes. Let's take a listen to the candidates tangling over that issue in this debate.
And she is for a massive tax increase for millionaires. And when that happens, that's going to increase our local property taxes. And the issue at hand right now is that the state is continuing to downshift costs to our local communities. And that has to stop. That's how we save when it comes to local property taxes.
But we want to get
Wait, I need to answer this. First of all, the legislature and the governor has eliminated the interest and dividends tax. It's gone. And she's going to bring it back from the dead. It's Halloween tomorrow, folks. If you're a retiree or you're saving for retirement, she's already said in this campaign she's going to increase your taxes.
Steve Marchand, this is another issue that, interest and dividends can be a little bit in the weeds a bit, and it's not necessarily a tax that a lot of regular working people pay, but this also gets to the issue of trust. Did Joyce do enough to answer the attacks on this issue?
I think she did, and let's face it, I've been around the state for 50 years, right? And the Republicans have decided the attacks on Manchester and while Joyce was mayor have not been effective. Insiders tell me the internal polling suggests that. And look at their ads. The ads have moved away from the sort of Manchester as hellscape vibe and moved towards typical tax and spend arguments. I think that Joyce did a nice job at the debate of answering that. And as you say, the reality is very few New Hampshireites were ever paying this tax in the first place. It was something that had been around for over a century. Republican and Democratic governors had never thought about reducing or much less eliminating it. And with a budget deficit that we're likely to face in the next biennial, we're already having shortfalls from projections in the budget to end this cycle. The next governor and legislature next cycle is going to have to make some of the most difficult financial decisions since the end of the Great Recession. And this is about being responsible and doing what's been done for 100 years under governors of both parties.
And yet, Steve Negron, Republicans feel like they can say here, hey, if you're willing to raise taxes here, what else is possible?
Absolutely. And I didn't quite understand Mayor Craig's answer about, taxing the billionaires. If she was talking about the interest and dividends tax, I could understand it, right? But we don't have any personal income tax here, so I don't know what she was talking about really about going after and really kind of having a safe haven for billionaires in the state. And quite frankly, when I fundraised, I didn't find a lot of billionaires in New Hampshire. I'm sure they are, but they just weren't talking. Anyway, so it was one of those situations. I think it's one of those... As a conservative, you lower taxes, means less spending and those kinds of things. So I think Steve's absolutely right. I think whoever takes the corner office, we're going to see some pretty draconian fiscal issues that are in front of whoever takes over the corner office. And you got to work with both houses to make sure that we do what's right for the people of New Hampshire.
Let's take a look at another moment from this debate. As both of these gentlemen were talking about, the Trump 2016 to 2024 evolution for Kelly Ayotte has been an issue for a lot of voters. Let's see how that played out on the debate stage.
Why is she spending so much time with the governor of Massachusetts when she wants to represent the people of New Hampshire? I'm proud to have an endorsement of Governor Sununu and campaign with him.
Mayor Craig, 30 seconds.
So where is it with Donald Trump? Where do you draw the line when he sexually assaults women? Because last time you didn't support him when he was thought to have sexually assaulted women, but now it's proven that he does, and you support him.
Well, you're never going to stand up if your party's in that corner office. You'll never stand up because you're a party line person. I've stood up to my party, and I'd do it again for New Hampshire.
You support a convicted criminal for president.
Steve Negron, you had to run alongside Trump on the ticket, so you've dealt with this as well. Yes. How do you think Kelly handled it?
Well, I think she handled it very well. One of the issues is that, all of a sudden you make a statement 8 years ago, and all of a sudden you're held to that forever, right? We could talk about during the 2020 Democratic presidential primary where our current vice president absolutely eviscerated the current president, right? But all of a sudden they shook hands and now they were a ticket. I think what you have to do is, what is Kelly going to do for us as the governor of the state of New Hampshire? You don't vote for me because of my friends, right? But what they're trying to do is attack character. And, well, if you said that then and said that now, and I think that's a lost point on a lot of people. And I think that Governor Craig lost some momentum there, because you don't try to box somebody else based on something that they said 8 years ago. And I know what they're trying to do. They did it to me. It happens in this world. It isn't about that. Is the individual's character in the right place to be the governor of this state? And I think she handled it perfectly.
Steve Marchand, I keep thinking about that poll that showed the number one thing that people, or at least maybe one or two people disappointed with Governor Chris Sununu, was about his switch on Trump after the primary. So it matters to some voters out there.
Well, it does. Look, part of Chris Sununu's electoral dominance came from significant crossover appeal. In some elections, upwards of 30% of Democrats were voting for Chris Sununu in the general election. That's dominance. But that was in part because of a perception that he was an honest broker on things like this. He would use profanity to describe Donald Trump at national events and get national attention for it. But as time went on, after the primaries were over, and he says, "Look, I'm going to go with Trump. You got to go with Trump," and it sounded much more conventional. And you find that without some of the benefits that that Sununu had, Ayotte doesn't have that shine that Sununu has, and so she's more like just a typical Republican. And let's face it, it appears, according to polling, she's going to have to outperform Trump by many points in order to win this election, and she's going to need some of those people that don't like Trump but will be willing to vote for her. This was a difficult moment for her to achieve that goal.
All right, much more to unpack. Stay with us, Steves. We'll be right back with the major party chairs, though, here in New Hampshire, Chris Egger and Ray Buckley.